Hello, everybody. We are here tonight to discuss, well, art and revolution, shall I say, the politicization of art and the artification of politics, the connections between art and politics. And this discussion comes from our previous debates about Walter Benjamin, especially the work of art in the age of its reproduction. And there have been long debates beforehand between Nika and Scott Thompson. And well, we are here to share their ideas, to listen to them and discuss with them about what they thought about this kind of this subject. Sorry for my delays, but I would give the floor to Scott as first, and then I'd like to discuss your ideas first. Scott.
Thank you very much, Simona. So Nika's asked me to give a quick introduction to Timothy O'Leary's article, Fat, Felt and Fascism, the Case of Joseph Beuys, which, whether he intends to or not, questions Beuys's expanded concept of art, whether it was fascist, based on a close reading of Walter Benjamin's text, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. In the essay Beuys, The Twilight of the Idol, Benjamin Bucklow took exception to the artist's use of myth. As O'Leary points out, the greatest work which Beuys undertook was his own life, and he famously constructed his own myth, where he was rescued by a tribe of Crimean Tatars after his plane had crashed during the Second World War, who covered his body in fat and wrapped him in felt in order to keep him warm and rejuvenate him. For Bucklow, in constructing this myth, Beuys turned himself into the victim, and like the German people, collectively refused to take responsibility for his actions. As an artist, he employed the same erratic authority that made Nazi Germany possible in the first place. After he was healed by the Crimean Tatar, they asked him to join their tribe, but Beuys refused and instead chose to become a shaman artist, incorporating the materials of fat and felt into his theory of sculpture and using them to heal the world or the social organism. But who was Beuys to assume the role of a mythic healer? Who does he claim to heal? What does he claim to heal them of? And by what means or by what authority? The root of Bucklow's issue with Beuys lied in his misconception that politics could become a matter of aesthetics, because it failed to understand the lessons of Walter Benjamin's essay on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. O'Leary argues that Bucklow's concerns about the danger of art entering into the sphere of politics are motivated by a philosophical anxiety regarding the relationship between aesthetics and fascism. It is clearly absurd to argue that any infringement of art into politics is inherently or logically fascist. This anxiety would lead to an unjustifiable blanket condemnation of any attempt to think of politics in terms of aesthetic activity. There are clearly fascist and non-fascist applications of aesthetics to politics. However, despite acknowledging that Benjamin's antidote to fascism's aestheticization of politics is in fact another such confusion of politics and the aesthetic, in other words, both sides of the opposition are aesthetic, and therefore we should bear in mind this opposition between aestheticized politics and politicized art is to an extent false. O'Leary argues that what distinguishes a fascist application of aesthetic activity from a non-fascist one for Benjamin was the production of ritual value. As he says, the uncontrolled application of outmoded concepts such as creativity and genius, eternal value and mystery leads to a processing of data in a fascist sense. And fascism is the violation of an apparatus which is pressed into the production of ritual values. All efforts to render politics aesthetic culminates in one thing: war. Following his reading of Benjamin, what makes Beuys's expanded concept of art fascist for O'Leary is not so much that he expands art into politics, but that he expands the wrong concept of art into politics, a traditional concept of art based on the production of ritual and myth. Where I disagree with O'Leary and Benjamin, if O'Leary's interpretation is correct, is with his proposed solution, that in order to avoid fascism or a fascist application of aesthetics to politics, it is necessary to de-ritualize both art and politics, that the politicization of art must be based on a non-traditional or non-ritualized concept of art. This, for me, is equally absurd. As David points out, ritual is an inherent aspect of human sociality, and we are all, in some sense, ritual-producing beings. There are clearly contemporary examples of a non-fascist application of aesthetics to politics that are based on ritual and myth. For example, in David's essay on the phenomenology of giant puppets, where the puppets revive the sacred and unalienated experience of the carnivalesque and are used to diffuse situations of potential violence. As Boris Groys says, there is good theatre and bad theatre. It would make no sense to forbid its use by politically oppositional movements. In Walter Benjamin's Concept of the Image, 2015, Alison Ross argues that despite Benjamin's early polemic against the analogy of human life as a work of art, in his essay on Goethe's Elective Affinities, 1922, and his continued allergy to the vocabulary of aesthetic form, ritual, and myth throughout his later writings, in terms of its practical function, the dialectical image, and I'm assuming any image space in Benjamin's writing necessary for the politicization of art, was ultimately dependent on all three in order to mark human life as meaningful or significant and to set it apart from the profane. So if both sides of the opposition are not only aesthetic, but also based on ritual and myth, what then distinguishes the aestheticization of politics from the politicization of art, other than the kind of politics doing the aestheticizing? She asks, does this mean that Benjamin's polemic against the aesthetic form unravels, and concludes, at times, it seems that the way the polemic is staged raises objections of logical contradiction. In On Revolution and History in Walter Benjamin, 2019, she expresses doubt over the emancipatory potential of progressive film that Benjamin proposes as the antidote to fascism's aestheticization of politics. And she raises concerns about the promise of a new mass art that would inculcate a distracted, collective relation to non-erratic form, saying that it's impossible to differentiate Benjamin's image space and its technology from the program that may be assumed to underlie fascist propaganda techniques. The contradiction and absurdity of the erratic wasn't lost on Joseph Beuys. According to Jan Verwert in The Boss on the Unresolved Question of Authority in Joseph Beuys, Beuys directly engaged with Benjamin's negative valuation of erratic form, defined as proximal with simultaneous distance, in his 1964 action, The Chief. He basically did exactly what Benjamin says you shouldn't do, and constructed a situation that resembled the German people experiencing the presence of an unseen speaker, the Führer, whilst listening to Nazi propaganda through the people's radio. Visitors to the performance space could hear his presence acoustically through the speaker in the corner of the room, but he was absent to them visually, wrapped up in felt on the floor with a microphone. The crucial thing, he says, is that Beuys did not simply produce an aura of authority, but that he also exhibited the material conditions of its production in all their crudity and exposed the contradictions inherent in this process in all their obvious absurdity. In this way, Beuys simultaneously constructed and dismantled an aura of authority. The performance constituted an event, however, its eventful qualities were reduced to a minimum. Nothing really happened. A man lay wrapped in a blanket between two dead hares and made strange noises on the floor for hours. If nothing else, Beuys had a pointed sense of humor. And I would like to think that David would have written a very insightful and humorous book about him. They seem to have shared a more positive or liminal conception of ritual and myth, a more dynamic materialism of a world in flux rather than static. Social structures are really just patterns of action. An anthropological definition of art, where through human action or human creativity, everybody is an artist. Human beings are projects of mutual creation, continually redefining and remaking themselves at the same time as they're reproducing and also inevitably changing the larger context through which all this takes place. Both wanted to undermine the boundaries between art and life, artist and non-artist. The point was not to mold society for aesthetic effects, but to transform society, turning all of human life and material reality into a form of social sculpture. The social and political realm, as well as the aesthetic realm, should be a site of experiment, transformation, and creative production. Do we agree with O'Leary's interpretation that Benjamin had a wholly negative valuation of the production of ritual and myth in the modern secular context? What would Benjamin's new materialist theory of art mean for Beuys's social sculpture, or David's work on social creativity? Would they both be brushed aside as being based on an outmoded concept? Does the total homogeneous space of modernity and mechanical reproduction really emancipate the work of art from its parasitical dependence on ritual and result in a loss of aura forever? If the aura is a topological or situational concept, as Boris Groys argues, is the artwork reauratized each time it's resituated within a closed, meaningful context? So where reproduction turns the artwork into a copy, the space of an art installation can turn a copy back into an original. Do we really need to de-ritualize art and politics? Or as Max Pekalski suggested in our last discussion, can we resalvage the sacred without being accused of fascism? Was it really the concept of art that caused the real fascism? Or did the politics of fascism use art for its own political design? Would the aestheticization of a decentralized and heterogeneous network of aesthetic and political enclaves based on a full and equal participation, voluntary association, direct democracy, and a non-vanguardist revolutionary practice produce the same result as a fascist aestheticization of politics? How would a non-vanguardist revolutionary art practice based on a tactical use of ritual work? Would an art practice based on a liminal concept of ritual be capable of generating new models or forms of social organization? Are even the most democratic of spaces depended on the sovereign violence and authority of the artist as their legislator? Are the contradictions of the erratic structurally inherent to all artistic practice, irregardless of your politics? I think I'll stop there before you end up as confused as I am. But just a few questions.
Yeah, I must confess, I'm really confused. I grabbed some ideas from your talk, but it's very difficult to form an opinion for me right now. Nika, do you have anything to add, to comment?
Yeah, actually, it will be great if you share the text, your text that you wrote, Scott. Yeah, because then it's will be more easy to follow your train of thoughts. But so how I understand that the problem or the question is, there is politics as we know that, and there is art also, as we agree now what is art and what is politics. And so I totally with Scott that whole conversation started from me bumping into the article of Timothy O'Leary about Beuys, where he accused him of using rituals and kind of suggested that we should make digitalized art. And so that was totally obvious that it's not possible even if it would be desirable. But then we started to dig further and read a bunch of other texts. One of them is a Groys text that I read some time ago. Now I reread it, and I think it's really very clear, as Groys is kind of clear. And it's about art and activism. And it's also asking kind of the same questions about connection between art and politics. And so according to Groys, he's clarifying what do we mean by art, specifically by contemporary art. And he's talking about art that was born after French Revolution by revolutionaries taking over Louvre, more or less, a palace, and turning the old art into the museum. And so Groys is pointing out that old art was a design, and that's a really good answer to our pre-recorded conversation with Christian, who was saying that some artists, medieval artists, was also part of like a bad deal, let's say, of Catholic Church that was burning witches. So the answer in this case by Groys, I think, would be yes, but they were doing literally some specific part of the church overall, how we call it, like vault. They didn't design the whole church. So after the contemporary art, the artists are claiming to be, that's their main role, to design the vision of the world. So in this case, the art affecting, working in the politics is not just, designing the uniform for the fascists. They're designing the whole, everything together, the whole, how you call it in English, milieu, or like in Russian, we would say political technology. So, but it's why I think, for example, I asked Simona to moderate, and to also, I think, Stephen, thank you very much for coming. So for me, the core answer is the following. So that is my opinion about relationship between art and politics. So according to One more thing. So Groys is talking about Marinetti. And Marinetti is clearly a fascistic art. You know, he was condemned by Russian futurism, for example, for representing the fascist forces. And so Groys is very beautifully, like always he's doing, manipulating the words, and he's writing about Marinetti beliefs as if he almost like this angel from Walter Benjamin essay about history. What is the name of the essay? Like looking back into the world. So Marinetti is not talking about the future. He's, according to Groys, talking about the past. He's kind of seeing the future that already happens, and it's a disaster. So he's just kind of this angel / demon who's so beautiful, so sad. Is like this demon from Russian painter Wrubel, who's depicted this enlargement of also this sad, poetic, romantic hero who kind of observe the universal laws of the world, and then feeling sad about that. But I think the problem here is not about rituals, but about the laws and beliefs in these laws. And if we take a look at that time, that was like a problem of fascism, but also a problem of vulgar Marxism, that they all believe in some kind of crazy set of laws that is driving our society. You know, so fascists believe that it's some biological laws, that we have to, you know, some blood and soil. Not only fascists, also many like Zionists, for example. Vulgar Marxists believe the same as a kind of class instinct that also kind of have to lead us to the proletariat dictatorship. Otherwise, the society wouldn't be good. And then the artist, according to Stalin, not to early Russian avant-garde, but actually to Stalin, supposed to serve these universal laws. And the same Marinetti, actually. But Malevich is not. I think Russian avant-garde in the beginning, especially prolet cult, they exactly as you, Scott, was saying. So the answer would be, if you make, if this rituals as carnival, let's say, yeah, then there is no such a things as Gestapo or NKVD or proletariat dictatorship. So it's a different type of social organization that we could call rituals, and yeah, and so some of them is really harmful for us as a human, and exactly. The one that believe in the existence of this outside laws that bigger than humans, and that but we humans can understand them, and then we can understand them and make them work and build our societal relationship according to these laws. So the Groys is also discussing. So to summarize what Groys is saying, he's discussing like a design as something very like application, something that is not connected to this amazing big laws, like, you know, the romantic, demonic Marinetti looking back on the world. And then Malevich actually, he's not only draw the paintings with the black square, he's mostly was doing design, but not design as only application. So one of the important Malevich contribution was construction of what he called planetron or architecton, that was a models of the future houses that the future humans will live. And from one side, we are living in these houses now. I'm living in the house more or less like that in Rollyway in London. But it wasn't just application. It was actually, kind of universal claim of his vision that he tried to kind of promote of how the humanity should be living according to him. So that's, I think, this separation between design and art that Groys is promoting in this article is just actually not is wrong.
You think it's wrong? Okay.
Of course, yeah. Why?
I found it quite confusing, Nika. I think I tried to explain why, because he says in the art activism essay, he says that Benjamin wasn't using aestheticization in the sense of design, but more in the sense of artistic aestheticization. And yet elsewhere in his work, he says the complete opposite.
Groys. I think what is very important is, everybody is using the same words like design, art, but everybody is mean very different by them. So I think in order to make this conversation productive, we should decide on a common understanding of terminology and then work from that.
Well, in the essay, he says, in the domain of design, the aestheticization of certain tools, commodities, or events involves an attempt to make them more attractive, seductive, and appealing to the user. That's how I would have understood how Benjamin is using aestheticization, kind of glorifying or making the Führer seem legitimate. But he says in that essay that's not how he's using it.
So yes, Groys is saying the design is application, but then it exists the art. So he's making this contradiction between design, something like law, and then art, something universal and big, something that is kind of talking about the bigger values. And so I'm just giving an example of Malevich in this case, that is combining both. And I think when you're talking about performance of Joseph Beuys, let's say, it's a quite also designish construction, you can say, of public event that is the same. I think we should let Christian say, and then Christian.
I'll keep it brief. Maybe first I wanted to say in the beginning, even before we started recording, was like confusion was mentioned several times from several people. And I think this is completely right. And to some degree, probably Benjamin, in this case, more than Groys, it's a bit like good lyrics, right? If you write a song and the lyrics are good, people can take something away that nobody else would, And I think in that way, somewhere else I recently read, I think it was in Graeber's Dead, that he said, like, there was this basic discussion in Chinese philosophy. Do we read the classics or the classics read us? And then when David Graeber goes out and he wrote his books and developed his themes, and I mean, he used sources that had been there for a very long time, and he saw something new in them, and that was him. So, I mean, to some degree, I find it really hard to resolve this. I mean, can you use art in political activism? Yes. But then you have to kind of start with what is art? I mean, Groys gives a definition of art here, but I'm pretty sure we could come up with a few more definitions very easily if we asked everybody in this round to give their personal definition of art. So, special kind of art, maybe not all art, you know. But for Groys, all art, everything he defines as art is political, as I understood his essay. I'm not really sure if this is true. I would even go so far as to say, like, there's a different opinion that says, you know, art can make maybe the hidden thing visible, which is also a thing he says. It's like, you take like modern art, you take something, it exposes about our modern society as a dead thing, you know, you put it on the pedestal in the museum so you can see it's already dead, right? And so maybe you can only make things visible, and then from this realization that the thing you made visible is dead, it stops working, so to speak. It's a bit like McLuhan, who said, like, the medium is the message. So it's not about the content that you see on the TV, it's about the politics of the medium. And there's a change, of course, you know, in the medium over time. So film is a different medium than painting was, you know, and now you have the internet, and now you have all this generative AI stuff. So this, what's really going on there? I mean, I'm not saying I do know, I just say there's a change. And then, yeah, I think that this is basically what I wanted to say. I'm not really sure if I have helped resolve the confusion, then merely have, you know, acknowledged it as well. So, yeah, but I think Groys is clearer than Benjamin is. But on the other hand, you know, Benjamin has become kind of a classic. So what we say about him says something more about us than about him, maybe.
Simona?
Yeah, I think I will add to the confusion. I just have random thoughts about it. Well, I'm not sure I understood half of your saying, Scott. So I will really answer randomly to some suggestions I felt. The first is about ritual and sacred. And the second is about the idea to use art for politics. I think the first thing is to use art is per se a fascist idea, because what you can use from our 99% point of view is the fact that everybody is an artist, is the breaking up of the separation of the artist and of art from the whole profane reality. The thing that I think both David and Benjamin were fighting was exactly this separation between profane and sacred, and profane and not profane. And it is sacred. It is separation that makes, that creates hierarchy, that creates power. It is the very fact to pretend there is something more universal, more true than the day-by-day life, and then our day-by-day mutual creation is setting up hierarchies and power as domination. What Carnival does is to desacralize. A carnival is a form of art. The masquerade, the joke, the performances that happen with giant puppets or with carnivals is first of all a desacralization, a collective desacralization of reality, is dismantling the idea that some are more universal, like David says in Manners, in the essay about manners. And this is what the ritual, the sacred, that has to be dismantled. And one thing, well, first of all, this essay by Benjamin is an attempt to please Bertolt Brecht. We should put it in context. It's an outreach to Marxists. That's why Marxists do love this essay so much. And it's also an attempt to connect or to take on the leftist side some ideas of futurism. For example, a friend of mine told me about a passage in Gramsci that I have not read, this passage, where he says that during the occupations of farms in the 20s, in the Red Biennial, Gramsci took workers at an exposition, and they immediately, at a futurist exposition, and they immediately recognized the broken gestures of the paintings they were seeing, because these were exactly the broken gestures of their everyday life at work. I think this is the reality Benjamin is talking about. But one thing he doesn't see, I think, is that the very medium of art, the radio, the broadcasting, creates a one-to-many situation, recreates a form of sacred, where people are not anymore aware that art and even abstraction is an abstraction from what they create day by day, from what everybody creates day by day. One more thing, and then I'll be quiet as well. About ritual as distinguished from sacred. Ritual and myth are our collective expression. They become fetishes when we forget that they are our creation. They are our projection, and they become and actually there is nothing bad about fetishes, as long as we remember that we can destroy them and recreate them, just as we recreate our collective engagements. So art is just an expression of all of this, and the fascism is when it becomes sacred, is when it pretends to be universal, and also when you think of it as a separated thing that can be used, if it's our collective creation of everyday life, if it's an expression of our collective ability to create, it cannot be sacred. Sorry if I was confused. This was just some random ideas. I don't know if somebody asked for the floor.
No, I think it's much more clear, Simona. The only thing I want to clarify, can I ask you? Sacred, as same as ritual, sacred and profane is always exist. I think the problem is only when they fixed, and anything that is pretend to be above human, but then absolute and kind of make us do the same, and like we were talking in the other reading group that law is a fetish, the same as I don't know, paintings in Louvre now is a fetish. So if it's okay to have, it's actually always something sacred and something profane, like mother's life could be sacred, and you know, it's just a normal language, I think. No. The problem when the violence impose on this to fix the rules. So basically, if you have a mechanism in a society to constantly reorganize everything, then things will work well. And that's why Beuys is totally correct to my opinion when he's saying that if everybody is an artist, then things will go well because everybody will have access to recreation, constant remaking of what we think as sacred and what we think as a ritual. So he did this performance that was ritualistic that Scott described with the two dead hairs and him lying in the, what is it, felt? But everybody from the audience may do something else. And he was actively, constantly promoting that idea. Do you agree with me, Scott?
I do, Nika, yeah. About the importance of things not being static. I agree with that, yeah. I think sort of Beuys, the way he talks about his theory of sculpture as like a metaphor for movement, sort of a constant oscillation between the warm organic form and the cold hard form. You know, the important thing for him was that it didn't become hyperstatized, you know, that it doesn't become sort of fixed or static, but you know, it's constantly moving from one to the other. That's how I understood it anyway.
Max?
Hi guys. I'm not very good at talking. Can you hear me, this microphone thing? I have to try and sort of contribute. I've made a little animation, which I kind of think answers a few of the things that we're trying to, I think from our last talk, I ended up reading a bit of Eisenstein, the Russian film guy. And yeah, there was this concept of this plasticity where, yeah, I don't know, it was following on from the Walter Benjamin. So if I could share my little screen. Sorry. My computer seems to have frozen. I know. Can you hear me again? I can't hear anyone else. So it's a bit sort of naive. So that was at work. So I think is a response to this, my frustration with my environment. And so art is a process of challenging these things that are sort of imposed upon us, these restrictions and stuff. And so finding these ways of, I don't know, change. And so I think, I don't know, animation is something I think, you know, what do they say? Postponing your disbelief, what's the expression? And so you're sort of drawn in to sort of accept the play in front of you. You let yourself go in with that. And I was able to do that at work, where I meant to be there for 8 hours, and this ability to take charge of my realm. Sort of, if my boss had walked around the corner, God knows what he would have, you know, fucking messing around with materials like that. But yeah, it's something about the skills that we own in our lives and how we work together. Yeah, I don't know. I'm all over the place. But anyway, it was a working in progress. But yeah, anyway.
Stephen? Stephen, are you there?
Oh, thanks. Thank you for that, Max. That actually kind of gets at one of the things that fascinates me about this topic, that also leads to, at least in my case, some of the confusion, and it's the distinction between ritual value and aesthetic value. There seems to be, in the debate between O'Leary and his take on Benjamin, an opposition between these two realms of value creation. That things can be created through ritual, that there's a ritual value and an aesthetic value, and that those are separate things. And I'm not sure I see the distinction quite the way the authors do, because when I think of ritual value and ritual value being produced, and this will, I hope, maybe clarify my comment in the chat for Nika. When one does a ritual, that ritual creates a separation, and it can create a sense of separating the sacred from the profane. As that ritual gets reproduced, the hierarchy that gets established in that separation can widen as that ritual expands from being just a microcosmic unit into its macrocosmic unit. And so as it expands, the separation between the individual actor and what is now sort of this fetishistic performance can take on, I think, a factor of degrees. But what has me curious is there a distinction between an aesthetic value and a ritual value? Because to me, it seems everything is inherently a ritual value, because everything is ultimately an expansion of some microcosmic unit that analytically we can get down to that kind of microcosmic, I'm speaking in structuralist terms, down to that kind of basic unit of analysis. And so that's where I'm left kind of wondering if even these distinctions are fair ones to make, or perhaps I've misread everything and they're not really making these distinctions.
Simona, Scott? or maybe I can ask more clarification. So why do you, that's really great. Thank you, Stephen. But what, why do you think that repetition of every ritual will widen the gap between the profane and sacred? Because it could be a liberatory rituals. Carnival is also ritual, but it's exactly doing the opposite. It's a mixed match in the profane and the sacred, as actually some theaters do, who is like deliberately kind of crossing the ramp, you know, the separation between the spectators and the theater performance.
Right, that's precisely what I'm getting at. That you know, unless there are those deliberate efforts to combat the tyranny of structurelessness, then there has to be those deliberate refusals. And Scott mentioned this, that like the giant puppets piece, the simultaneous construction and dismantling. And so that's where I think that ritual behavior. I was so happy to hear Simona mention the manners piece, because there is a, sacredness is associated with avoidance. And so there's an avoidance that, as that avoidance gets reproduced, it can become more fixed. I agree that it isn't inherently fixed, but I tend to think that in the absence of some kind of mechanism to work against its solidification, that it will have a tendency to solidify. But I don't know.
Isn't that also what we talked about in the Graeber group? The Graeber group is all, no, the dead reading group. When damn, now I've lost my train of thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes think of one of the pieces that David never got to finish, and Simona and I have talked about this piece. He gave it as a paper at the University of Manchester in 2018, and it's on debt and servitude. And he tries to tease out the origins of capitalism by going back to seeing its roots in a kind of courtly service, which cuts against, all the major theories of the origins of capitalism. But I think he's dead on that it began as this ritual of avoidance, yet that avoidance had at its heart a level of intimacy, because the person who was brought in as the royal retainer was typically someone who was captured as a prisoner of war, who would if female, would be the king's daughter, and then if male, would be the king's son, or someone that would be identified as a potential successor. So it just, I know this has nothing to do with art, but I just think of these rituals and how rituals of avoidance start at the most intimate of places typically, and that I find fascinating.
No, I think it's it has everything to do with art, like especially contemporary art exists only by redefining itself constantly. That's actually good things about art.
I actually don't know why, but I keep thinking of Elias Canetti and of his idea of the opposition between the closed mass, the closed mass, and the open one, and his idea of metamorphosis. The closed mass is the one that is that cannot change, that is blocked from metamorphosis. I really don't know why it resonates with me in this context. Maybe you can have an idea. Maybe it's about masses and they're being closed or open. Just an idea.
What do you mean by, sorry, Samana, do you mean closed mass as in mass of people?
Canetti, crowds, sorry, the English word is crowds and power. And Canetti said the most important opposition is the one between the undetermined, spontaneous crowd that forms in a spontaneous march, for example. He started from his experiences of being in an open crowd that was rallying Vienna during the start of a revolution after the First World War, and a crowd that is enclosed like in a stadium or in a church, that is identified and has an inside and an outside. And the origins of war and power were all in the enclosure of crowds. And the distinction between this, the enclosed crowd and the external. But I'm really taking the discussion outside its rails. So, yeah.
Maybe, Scott, could you, I don't know, we should probably summarize now or in wrap up because we are like exactly an hour. I don't know, would you want to say no? Okay, so yeah.
Thank you very much for everybody's contributions.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. So I would just say for me, I probably was not, I believe I have to write my English text in English and then be more prepared, and I'm sorry for disorganized thoughts. But for me, internally, it's really clear. I don't have any kind of doubts of what is kind of going on. I think, like, I think actually Walter Benjamin is totally correct in his text, and that's why it's so amazingly popular. And the confusion is a confusion of the terminology, but then some of the, like, we should just clarify it and make it really clear. What do we mean by art? What do we mean by design? What do we mean by ritual? And what do we mean by politics? And I think there is no such a thing as only design anymore, unless we are talking about some very pragmatic stuff. And for me, still the aestheticization of politics is fascistic, and politicization of art is communistic and a correct things to do, and that's require an equal access of as everybody who wants to access, let's say, to the creation of art that is a complex structure that will always rearrange itself, and that's exists with sacred and profane. I think, Simona, you would agree with me that sacred and profane is actually always there. There is no such a thing as absent of, or no, because, so that's important to clarify.
Yes, sacred is and profane are always there. Sacred represents a projection of our collective power, of our collective creativity. And I was referring to the essay on fetish, on fetishism. And yes, there is always a dialectic, may I say. Sacred is a projection, but as soon as we project it, it becomes, and it reflects a reality that is wider than each of ourselves. The bad in it is when somebody pretends to represent this universal thing, and when we forget it's, even if it's bigger than each one of ourselves, it's still ourselves.
Yeah, and actually,
so, yeah, the desacralization is always an important.
Yeah, but so all contemporary politics is built on that, on this projection, and that whoever is like, Biden or Putin or whoever else, they claiming to be universal, and they have lots of people who are especially working very hard to design it as something that is absolute. With and this is very different from medieval artists who's producing some stuff inside of the overall existing system. See, here it's critical that it's different type of work and attitude. So I think what we should all do, we should just all engage in making as many carnivals as possible and spreading around the technology of how everybody can make them as many as possible. That's why I actually so much love Extinction Rebellion, because this is like the first guys who actually give people tools of how to create art movements that is a political movements. Because everything about Extinction Rebellion was, like produce the flags, make your own banners, just come together in costumes, and so on and so forth. And yeah, like I think that's a kind of new art that is non-fascistic, but very political, of course.
Even if we should discuss Extinction Rebellion Italy, because it looks quite different from it. But this is another part. So thank you, everybody. I think we should really wrap up.
Yeah.
And thank you, Scott. Please share your text, and I hope we can discuss it even more on another meeting.
I'm trying to work out how to, Simona.
Yeah. And by the way, there was a proposal to discuss. Do you know what Momo is? Momo is a novel by a German symbolist in the 30s, and it's about banks stealing people's time, about time being a material reality, and about it's a tale, and about a child rescuing time from banks, and it's a wonderful novel, and there's a movement for that wants to claim our time and creativity back, that is named after this novel. And a friend of mine suggested to discuss this novel and this movement in and maybe in April or in some time.
Amazing, thank you. So let's
I'd enjoy that.
Huh? So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey guys. Salam.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you.
See you soon.